Normally I don't do reviews like this, but when I learned about Biomutant being released this month, I said to myself, I don't know if I can handle another Cyberpunk. And since this game is also $60, I thought what better way to make good use of my money than to exercise a new creative effort. And on paper, Biomutant seems to be a wonderful experience that I was eager to jump into, boasting some really unique and beautiful artwork, fun dynamic action, and a big open world to explore. But I've learned to approach new games with cautious optimism by assuming the worst. But even then, I did not know how deep this disappointment could be. For this review, I will be skipping the basic description of the game. If you really want to know, watch Skill Up or ACG's videos, as they do a fantastic job describing what Biomutant is, and the point of this review is to give a perspective that is slightly different than what you can read and watch from other notable review sites. If you are familiar with other role-playing or open-world games, then you will understand the formula, and there's nothing here that pushes the genre forward in any way. I will place links below to those reviews, as they are my inspiration for attempting this video, as well as being great videos on their own. Be warned, there will be spoilers here, but really there's not that much to spoil, because I'm more concerned with saving you money and disappointment than preserving the game's chastity, and it doesn't really have anything to discover that actually makes it worthwhile in the end, so spoiler warning. I want to start by speaking to the good parts of the game, which are the parts that kept me engaged and ultimately led me to find some peace of mind with my experience. The most obvious strong point is the visual style and artwork. It is in this area that Biomutant will draw players in and will shine as an example of a unique vision between its colorful foliage, vibrant character designs, and subtle nods of humor as it explains its lore through environmental details that you discover along the way. Every area on the game's exterior shines with a nice polish and only falters when looking at a few unfortunate enemies in drab underground locations. The benefit of these interior spots, however, is that it creates a fresh feeling when stepping back into the lush landscape and gives a nice contrast to help you appreciate the good parts of the artwork. Pairing nicely with the aesthetics are bits of wisdom the game provides in its dialogue that echoes an Eastern philosophy of the balance of light and dark and the duality of choices. It is a nice touch to take gibberish and provide real wisdom that could help developing minds find peace in a chaotic reality. The looting and crafting system is arguably one of the best, as it is both accessible and a wonderful game of discovery as you find the best loot and craft the best gear, which ultimately unlocks the game's potential for fun. Looting is pretty basic, and the key to it, I found, was to max out your luck attribute to make every loot spot a chance to find a game-changing piece of armor or weapon base that would allow you to craft an overpowered weapon. In my personal experience, I was able to feel this fun factor fully when I put together an assault rifle capable of melting every single enemy that stood in my path and felt for once like a true badass. From there, it was simply exploring, tweaking, and capitalizing on the game's systems that allowed for the maximum amount of ranged carnage. This was carried over to the melee combat when I was able to discover a crush weapon capable of excessive amounts of damage per hit that finally made the melee combat feel like melee combat, because it finally had a sound effect and finally knocked enemies back in a way that felt like actual feedback. It feels weird, however, to design a game where the fun has to be earned to this degree, and having to play over 10 hours of a game to simply feel something is not good. And this is where the game, unfortunately, dives into a realm of pure broken gameplay that has no redeeming qualities by the time its final moments pass. The closest comparison I can make to this experience is that of Season 8 of Game of Thrones, which you, if you are a fan of the show, know that the last season has this toxic characteristic where it retroactively ruins the beginning of the series. Because the ending is so bad, it makes the setup and the teasing nature of what's to come feel even more like a massive waste of time than not knowing what the ending is. So I put about 25 hours into this game, hoping that I would find some glimmer of redemption in its end game, only to be horribly disappointed by its lack of freedom when it forces you into a new game plus mode where you're doomed to retread the hollow game loop. This may sound extreme, but I can say with ease that the beginning narrative structure, missions, and gameplay are some some of the worst I've ever experienced from a game boasting a $60 price tag, and it's something I wanted to break down a bit because I think many people have expressed dismay in the lackluster substance of the game, but don't really explain how they got there. So in most open world games, they follow this coined term Ubisoft formula. You get territories, and you find enemies in those territories, and you kill them until the territories become yours. In Biomutant, however, they test the limits of how low that formula can go with copy and pasted lackluster mission design. You enter these outposts by approaching an NPC, the game forces you into a cutscene, and then teleports you into the outpost, and then you're given back control and you fight like 3 enemies at a time until you either rescue someone, fight a mini boss, or sometimes you run outside the outpost and fix or destroy 3 things and then the outpost is taken over. So first of all, the cutscenes are horrible, poorly animated, awkward transitions that remove you from the immersion of the world leading up to that trigger point, and they lack any sense of the developers understanding how to create an enjoyable scripted event. Next, a game of this generation having an enemy density this low is an insult to even the most newbie gamer looking for an exciting action sequence. It feels and it performs like an early Xbox game where the hardware was literally limited to rendering 1 to 2 enemies at a time. But even then, games like 99 Nights and Dynasty Warriors have existed during the original Xbox's life, so this is a major step backwards for an action game claiming to be like Devil May Cry. This sensation is dulled even further when performing the final outpost raids. The event is built up to be like a fight between 2 warring tribes, like this massive battle for dominance, and when you arrive in the outpost, you're fighting 5 enemies in an empty compound. It's completely lame and boring experience, compounded once again when you learn this structure is the exact same for every tribe that you're taking over. Each outpost only has the slightest change in cosmetics, but the outpost missions, the enemy density, and even the dialogue exchanges are identical for all 6 tribes. It's so bad, even the developers recognized this cut and paste time wasting sensation and let you choose to skip them after the first 2 tribe battles. It is absolutely dreadful, and it is literally the first narrative hurdle you have to experience to enter the game. Granted, you can ignore all this stuff and freely explore to your liking, but for those looking for the story portion of an RPG, this is a buzzkill. This poor mission design never really leaves the game either. Every side quest is a fetch quest, every fetch quest requires 3 to 15 tasks that are all the same, but spread across the map in all these random places, and if it wasn't for the environment and the looting system, the sprawling, chore-based, tedious mission design would be utterly unthinkable to even attempt. There are a few side quests buried in the list that do result in actual good loot gain, but for the most part, I'd say 90% of them are an outright waste of time. Or they give you a base level of XP that you would have gained faster and more interestingly by exploring the world without the mission prompt. The side missions are also a bit confusing sometimes, as some of them are actually mixed together with the main quest lines that grant you summonable crafts. And while these are fun add-ons, the rewards gained are usually restricted in a weird way that dull the fun even more. The mech suit, for example, can only be summoned in the specific quadrant of the map you get it for. As with the goo glider, jet ski, it's only applicable to the quadrant it's designed for. So you cannot wander around wherever you want and summon these cool toys you're given, and it's a weird, disappointing decision that I have trouble understanding. The game boasts a lot of options for traversing the 8 square kilometer space, but all of them are identical except for the cosmetic look of the creatures, or some of them are so functionless they are pointless additions that add a false layer of choice. The bat creature you get from the Pebble quest line, for example, is supposed to be a flying creature, which is pretty exciting to get, but you learn immediately that its gliding is no better than the glider you receive from your grasshopper, and it lacks the ability to fly on its own. So you're literally given a slow-moving, winged rodent that requires you to climb up a ledge, then summon it, only to have the same mobility as the glider that you just needed to jump to use in the first place. And it is this tease of something good that ultimately makes the game hurt so much. You begin to realize the developers took the time to add underdeveloped things in order to provide you a wide selection of other equally mediocre things that add nothing to the experience, and you just have to wonder why. Every mount or vehicle is a reminder of this shortcoming. You get a robot horse that functions like the other four-legged mounts, which are all the same and act the same way. The submersible craft is used once for one specific boss fight, and there's no environment to explore with it. You spend a bunch of time doing these fetch quests to build this craft, thinking you might get a new underwater environment to explore, only to be put directly into a room and fight the boss, only to leave the vehicle behind and never come back to it at all. Every new addition bogs the game down with new confusing restrictions. The hand crawler is the slowest and has no use whatsoever. The mech suit is worse armor than your regular character, has worse weapons, and is ultimately just a way to breathe in the toxic zone until you get the airtight suit, which renders the mech suit completely useless. So there's something about obtaining a new toy only to have it not work that is worse than not having the toy at all, and shows you with every turn how misguided the development team was. Now, the combat has been scrutinized quite a bit, and I don't think I have too much to offer other than some advice. Break the balance of the game with overpowered gear. I was able to find some joy in the fighting only because I no longer had to deal with spongy enemies. I no longer had to waste time with awkward enemy encounters where I was clipping through creatures or being cheaply tossed around because of bad animations and broken hit detection. I don't think many players will get to where I was with the combat system simply because I made a weird choice to build up my luck skill above all else, and I let the good loot system guide my experience. So by skipping the bad combat, I was finally able to find the fun combat, which led me to think this game should have just been a third-person shooter like Jak and Daxter or Ratchet and Clank, and this could have been better overall by focusing on shooting mechanics than this underwhelming and broken melee combat system that's supported by one of the weakest development paths I've ever seen in a game where you can build up a character's move list. Literally every move is already unlocked when you start the game, so when leveling up your character, you only have to buy into 2 moves per weapon type. It's so underwhelming, I almost wish they didn't include it in the first place. There are perks for your character that do help, but this could easily have been the only passive upgrade tree you have to consider, instead of teasing us with an undercooked move list. The boss fights in this game are also some of the most awkward combat encounters I've ever experienced due to a mixture of bad enemy attack patterns, uninspired arenas, and technically broken performances and animations during those fights. Each boss fight is teased in the exact same way. Like, literally. They use the exact same video clip showing the exact same environment, and they swap the boss creature out in place of one another. And it just shows you the level of corner cutting and budget saving techniques that pollute this game from being anything other than too much for the developer to chew. The boss fights all consist of a 3-phase health bar and vary slightly based on the craft being used, but ultimately they end in a strafe around in a circle while holding down the shoot button until the health bar reaches 0 strategy. They make an attempt to mix them up by putting one underwater, one in a broken city with destructible buildings, but they all feel and play out the exact same way and are utterly not worth the setup costs to get them. The sound is wrong. And I don't mean that to be cheeky, I mean the mix is wrong. The sounds of hooves, impacts, motors all sound like they've been muted or placed in some glass bottle with the lid glued down. The music cues are messed up as well. When transitioning between environments, you'll be inundated with the same music starting up over and over again, and it feels once again like this is an amateur attempt to layer elements into the game world, and it's just something I was not expecting to be broken. The lack of proper or effective sound effects is something that takes a broken experience and cripples it beyond repair, as every action and dramatic beat falls flat and opens a chasm into the hollow experience that we've purchased. I am glad to hear that they're going to patch this part, but sadly I will already have put this game away by the time I get to enjoy it. So on the smaller scale of gripes, for a game made for young players, it feels a little harsh to have death be so immediate for small mistakes. Things like running out of energy in the water, stepping too far into an oil pit, falling down a cliff. These are all deaths that require you to reload instead of a soft reset. There's a handful of user interface problems as well when navigating your inventory, using the map and journal, and everything seems to have this rough edge to it that comes from a lack of expertise in the design of these elements. Or it seems that they only knew how to mimic the top layer of these interfaces from other games like Wildlands or Horizon Zero Dawn, but missed the message on how to create fluid interactions and skip over redundancies. For example, why do I have a separate menu menu for gear and crafting. The gear menu is only used for equipping gear, and the crafting menu, I can also equip gear as well as modify the item, and it seems like they overlooked this completely unnecessary menu option that could have just been merged with the crafting menu for an easier management of inventory. All of this might be excusable if the story was any good, and the only reason the story ends up being a waste of time is because the ending is so underwhelming and lacking in any sense of connection to the choices you made. I chose the dark path, which destroys the tree, and when those final moments come to fruition, first of all, the world's destruction doesn't seem to really come from anywhere. There's no build-up to the idea of the world becoming unstable other than some loose dialogue where people keep saying, the world's gonna end. At no point does the earth shake or quake or deform. There are no disturbances in the world that change as you progress through the missions. Everything is just stale and static. So when you finally get to the point where the world is being blown up, it does not feel earned at all and completely random. Also, on a technical level, it just looks terrible. The ground just sort of cracks, but you can still see that it's just a layer over the ground, and the ground underneath is there, is untouched. And the animations occurring around you are mistimed, poorly implemented, and just bad. This poor story presentation is felt throughout the experience. Even early on in the flashbacks, there are just mistimed events that are supposed to pull you into the experience, but ultimately look like a rip-off of a Pixar movie that's made by a con artist. This doesn't even touch upon the antiquated technique on display for providing a narrative in a video game. Instead of a traditional cutscene or diegetic dialogue within the game world, we are constantly being pulled out of the character control and put into a basic dialogue scene, only to cut to a crudely animated sequence that lasts about 5-10 seconds, then crossfade into another, and then cut back to our character that's being teleported somewhere. This is what it's like for the first 10 hours of the game, constantly having the camera control taken away from you, as if the developers assumed you were a brain-dead child, incapable of understanding anything unless it's shoved in your face, and it ruins any chance of enjoying the game's story. And I'm sad to say, in conclusion, after 4 years of waiting, wondering if I was ever real or just an interesting teaser all those years ago, I am forced to say this is, without a doubt, a bad video game. I wonder what could have happened if they had opted into an early access development plan. I wonder what could have improved with the game before debuting it in this broken form. I wonder what it would be like if they didn't say it was worth $60. I'm left befuddled by the display of arrogance by a developer that has pulled talent from teams that have made decent open world games before. I wonder what was ignored in the testing phase, if there even were game testers. I wonder if the people leading this effort heard critical feedback and blatantly ignored it, only to listen to what they wanted to hear. This is like Breath of the Wild. This is like Devil May Cry. Only to then say, well, people love it and we are confident, while all these errors and small mistakes weigh down what could have been an amazing experience. I wonder more than ever what that work environment was like. Did it inspire people? Did it abuse people? What could have led to this game to be this way when it had so much setup to be amazing? I might never know the true answer here, other than to say, I am reminded that it is a miracle that any game is good. There is no magic formula and there are no guarantees, and we cannot go based off how a game is described to us. We must simply find what is good and hold on to it. And after 20 plus hours in this world, scrutinizing to find joy in a broken, beautiful experience, I am ready to let this go. If you like this video and want to see more daily content, or just hang out for a bit, please follow me on my Twitch channel where I play a variety of games on a regular basis. If you don't like the video or have suggestions on what you want to see reviewed next, please let me know in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.